I use websites like Craigslist all the time, just like most people do. You can find expensive stuff at really low prices, or even cheap things for even cheaper. I don't have a lot of money, so using these sites is a must when I need to get things like furniture, which is usually pretty pricey. This happened when I was searching for a new gaming desk. My old one was falling apart after years of use, and I really needed something sturdy for my setup. I checked out Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp first, but there wasn't anything good. Most desks were still too expensive, and even when I tried to negotiate, the sellers wouldn't lower their prices. So, I decided to try Craigslist. Not many people in my area use it anymore, but I knew I might find a good deal there. As soon as I started searching, a listing popped up that caught my eye. It was a simple wooden desk in good condition, and the seller was only asking $50. Compared to the $1, $200, $300 others were asking, this was a steal. I messaged the seller right away, telling him I was interested and could pay the full price. He didn't reply immediately, so I took a break and hung out with my little brother until around 8 p.m. When I checked my phone later, I saw a message from the seller. He said he was planning to throw the desk out the next morning, but if I wanted it, I could come by tonight or any time before 5 a.m. It was strange that he was okay with me coming so late, but I didn't think too much about it, I replied, saying I could come right now since it was only 8 p.m. The seller quickly agreed and sent me his address. The place was only about 15 minutes from my house, so I told my mom where I was going and headed out. When I arrived, I could tell the neighborhood wasn't great. The seller's house looked really run down, with trash all over the yard, which was surrounded by a rusty, old fence. I parked on the street and walked up to the house. The front door was open, and I could hear people talking and laughing inside. I knocked lightly on the door, and a guy who looked like he was in his early 20s appeared and invited me in. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed how dirty the place was. There were empty pizza boxes and soda cans scattered around, and the carpet was stained. It looked like a place where a bunch of college kids lived and partied. The guy seemed friendly enough, though, and casually led me down a hallway to the room where the desk was. In the room, 2 other guys were standing against the wall, chatting. The desk looked surprisingly good, considering the state of the rest of the house. I walked over to check it out, making sure it was sturdy, but as I did, the whole room suddenly went silent. The 2 guys stopped talking, and the seller didn't say anything either. I looked up and saw all 3 of them staring at me. Feeling uneasy, I asked, "Did I do something wrong?" But they just kept staring. One of the guys had huge pupils, like he'd taken something strong, but I didn't know what. At that moment, I knew something was off. I didn't want to be in that house any longer, and I definitely didn't want the desk anymore. I think I'm going to pass on the desk. Thanks anyway, I said quietly. I turned to leave, but one of the guys stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway. He didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at me. My heart started racing as I realized whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. But then one of the other guys whispered something to the one blocking my way, and he stepped aside. I didn't waste any time. I quickly walked down the hallway, out the door, and back to my car. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I had stayed. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She convinced me to call the police, but without anything actually happening, there wasn't much they could do. I still wonder what those guys had planned, and I just hope no one else has to find out the hard way. I had always wanted to visit the Rocky Mountains, a place I had dreamed of seeing since I was young. My plan was to spend most of my time hiking and exploring the mountain trails, but I also wanted to experience camping in the wild for at least one night. Even though I had camped a few times before, this would be my first time going alone. I rented some basic camping gear from a small outdoor shop in town and found a trail that led to a remote campsite. I woke up early the next morning, packed my things, and started my hike. The trail was peaceful and the weather was perfect, clear skies and a cool breeze. After a few hours of walking, I arrived at the campsite. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall trees, with signs that others had camped there before, like an old campfire pit and some forgotten gear. I set up my tent near a large rock at the edge of the clearing, planning to spend a quiet evening under the stars. As the sun set, I built a fire and brought out the s'mores ingredients I had packed. I made more than I probably should have, but it was fun to relax and enjoy the sweet treats by the fire. Just as I was starting to feel completely at ease, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A young guy, probably around my age, appeared from the trees and walked over to my campfire. He didn't say anything, just sat down across from me, staring into the flames. I tried to start a conversation, asking if he was camping nearby, but he didn't respond. The silence was unsettling. After a minute, he stood up and walked back into the woods without a word. I was left feeling uneasy, unsure of what had just happened. I kept the fire going for a while longer, staying alert in case he came back. Eventually, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of crackling flames. Confused, I unzipped my tent and saw that my campfire was burning again. But what really scared me was the group of 3 men sitting around it, all staring straight at my tent. Among them was the guy who had visited earlier. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. One of the men spoke in a language I didn't understand, and before I could react, 2 of them stood up, grabbed me, and took my phone and wallet. They were much stronger than me, and I didn't even try to fight back. After searching my things, they dragged me into the woods. I was terrified, sure they were going to hurt me. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they suddenly pushed me to the ground, hit me on the head, and ran off. Dazed and scared, I just lay there for a while trying to gather my thoughts. When I finally got up, I started walking in the direction I hoped would lead me back to the main road. My head was pounding, and the darkness made it impossible to see where I was going. I tripped over rocks and tree roots, getting more and more disoriented. After about half an hour, I was so exhausted that I passed out. When I came to, I had no idea where I was. I started walking again, praying I was heading the right way. After what felt like forever, I saw a light moving through the trees. Thinking it might be help, I called out. The light stopped, and I realized it was another person. As I got closer, I saw 3 more figures step into the light. It was the same group of guys. Panic took over, and I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I didn't stop until I was sure they weren't following me. Though the encounter scared me more than anything, it also gave me a sense of direction. I kept walking the way they had come from, and after a few more hours, I finally stumbled onto a road. At dawn, I flagged down a passing car and was taken to safety. Once I got back to town, I reported everything to the police. They managed to find my car, but most of my gear was gone. Even though I was out a few items, I was just glad to be alive. Those guys weren't interested in killing me, but leaving me alone in the wilderness at night was almost as bad. If I hadn't seen them again in the woods, I might never have found my way back. I was working a late shift for a delivery company, something I only did on the weekends. It was around midnight when I got an order for a small delivery to an office building across town. The address seemed normal enough, but when I arrived, the entire area felt off. The sky was clear with a full moon casting shadows across the empty parking lot. There wasn't a single car in sight, and the building itself was dark except for one dim light shining from the entrance. I parked near the front and got out with the package. The building was small, just 2 stories tall, and all the windows were pitch black. I checked the delivery app, and the instructions said to leave the package outside room 210. I had never delivered directly to a room in an office building before, so it felt strange. But I figured it was just a late-night order for someone working overtime. The front door was unlocked, and I stepped inside. The hallway was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of a vending machine breaking the silence. The rooms on the ground floor were all numbered in the 100s, so I knew room 210 had to be upstairs. I found the staircase at the end of the hallway, but it was completely dark. There wasn't a single light on the second floor, and the whole place gave me an uneasy feeling. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I noticed a man standing in the doorway of one of the ground floor offices. He wasn't dressed like someone who worked in an office, more like a regular guy who didn't belong there. He looked at me, then pointed towards the stairs without saying a word. Something about the way he stared at me made my instincts scream to leave. I hesitated for a moment before I decided to trust my gut. I quickly placed the package on the floor and turned to leave. As I walked away, I heard the man's footsteps heading towards the staircase. I didn't look back. I just kept walking until I was outside and back in my car. The next day, I got a call from the police. They told me the office building had been broken into, and they had seen my car on the security cameras. They asked me to come in and explain what I saw. I told them about the man and how strange the whole situation felt. It turned out there were 3 people involved in the break-in. The man I saw was downstairs, but the other 2 were waiting at the top of the stairs, hidden in the dark. I later found out that other drivers had also delivered packages to that same building that night, but they had left the packages at the front door. I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I had gone up those stairs. I was 16 years old, and this happened just a few months ago. It was late October. School had been tough, so I decided to unwind by playing some games. My friends, Ethan and Luke, were up for a match, and we planned to play something together online. My mom was visiting a friend, and my dad was working late. The house felt colder and quieter than usual. It was around 7 p.m. when we finally started playing. I grabbed a snack before settling in, but I wasn't really into the game. After a while, my friend signed off, leaving me alone in the game and the house. I figured I'd watch some videos in bed before calling it a night. Just as I was about to doze off, I heard the faintest noise, like someone was trying to open a door quietly. My heart skipped a beat. I had no reason to believe anyone was home, but the sound made me uneasy. I got up to check, peering through the window into the backyard. Nothing. But then I heard it again. I decided to investigate, slowly walking down the hallway. The living room was empty, and the front door was locked, but something didn't feel right. Just as I was about to head back upstairs, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the basement. I had nothing to defend myself with except a small table lamp. I crept down the basement stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the bottom, I saw a figure in the shadows. Someone tall and thin with a hood pulled over their head. Without thinking, I bolted back upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I locked myself in my room. I texted my mom, telling her what happened, but I knew she wouldn't be back for a while. The footsteps continued, now coming up the stairs. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and hid in the closet, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator stayed on the line with me as I heard the intruder searching the house. The door to my room creaked open and I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't find me. Minutes later, I heard sirens, and the intruder's footsteps hurried down the stairs. I stayed hidden until I heard the police shouting, then cautiously stepped out of the closet. The police had caught the intruder, a man in his 30s, who had been trying to hide in my basement. That night changed everything. My parents upgraded our security, and I never stayed home alone again. The fear I felt was like nothing I'd ever experienced, and it's something I hope to never go through again. I'm 27 and recently started renting a small, cozy cabin deep in the woods. It was a nice escape from city life, and I was looking forward to some peace and quiet. I lived alone and enjoyed the solitude, especially in the cool, crisp autumn weather. The cabin was perfect for one person. It had a small kitchen, a comfy living room, and a bedroom upstairs. Everything I needed was within reach, and I felt safe. The only strange thing was that the previous tenant had left some of their stuff in the basement, including a heavy old safe built into the wall. I didn't think much of it and figured I'd deal with it later. One Friday evening, after a long week of work, I got home just as the sun was setting. The temperature had dropped and a light drizzle had started, making the woods around the cabin feel even more isolated. I changed into some warm clothes and made myself a cup of hot chocolate. I decided to spend the night watching movies and relaxing. As I settled into the couch, I heard a loud thud coming from the basement. My first thought was that it was the wind, or maybe an animal outside. I tried to ignore it and focused on the movie, but the sound came again, this time louder. It felt like the entire cabin shook for a second. I paused the movie and listened carefully. The rain was now pouring, making it hard to hear anything else, but then I heard the sound again. Another heavy bang, this time followed by what sounded like metal scraping. I had no reason to be scared, but something didn't feel right. I got up and slowly walked to the basement door. My heart was racing as I flicked on the light switch and cautiously made my way down the creaky wooden stairs. I noticed the old safe in the far corner, but it looked undisturbed. I was about to turn around when I caught sight of movement near the stairs. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure hiding behind some boxes. The dim light barely illuminated their face, but I could see their eyes staring right at me. My mind went blank with fear. This wasn't some animal or random noise. There was a person in my basement, and they weren't supposed to be there. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that came to mind. I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my hands trembling as I explained what was happening. They told me to stay on the line and wait until they arrived. The banging noises from the basement grew louder and more frantic, like the person down there was trying to break something open. But finally, I saw the flashing lights of the police cars outside. The officers quickly made their way to the basement and found the intruder. He was a man in his late 30s, dressed in dirty clothes and looking disheveled. They also found a crowbar and a sledgehammer near the old safe. The officers told me that break-ins like this had been happening in the area recently. Burglars were targeting secluded cabins, looking for valuables hidden away in places like the old safe in my basement. What scared me the most was how ordinary the man looked, like someone you'd pass on the street and never think twice about. I spent that night at a friend's house and decided the next morning that I needed to move. The cabin, once a place of peace, now felt like a trap. I didn't want to take any more chances.